Hello, everyone. This is another episode of the AIER Bastiat Society, Switzerland. The AIER is the American Institute for Economic Research. The Bastiat Society, Switzerland, is the society newly opened the chapter in Switzerland. The honor to have Hugh Hendry, legendary investor. I've been following you for a long time.
So I'm coming at you from the island of St. Bart's in the French West Indies in the Caribbean. I have been stationed here now for about 5 years, more or less, on then off. Prior to that, I ran an eclectic global macro hedge fund strategy, which was unique in that it had few peers, in that it was brave to be silly. It was brave to recognize what it did not understand. And we had our highs, we had our lows, but I'm proud to say that we generated tenure. I think there's much wisdom in surviving. I think I overstated. I said 17 years when I want to say 15 years. We closed the business in 2017 and developing over-the-top luxury rental houses for the North American market. So that's me. Oh, and of course, I engage in social media, and I have a social media platform, and periodically I lay down some tracks on my YouTube. I reach out with friends, and we try and consider some of the more pressing matters of the day on Hugh Hendry Official.
Thank you, Hugh. Look, from an external perspective, I was kind of sad when I heard you were closing the fund. I think for three main reasons. The first one is the lack of critical thinking that was much needed in the market. The second one is from a purely portfolio perspective. I was thinking, are they mad? We need somebody to have completely out of the box ideas to diversify the portfolio in ways that anyways would not be otherwise possible in your own cubicle. Yeah. And the third one is just by having an advocate out there that would dare to say what a lot of people want to say but couldn't. Just as an example, I'm a hardcore libertarian, almost anarcho-capitalist, right? But my wife, on the other hand, she works for the United Nations, and she happens to be Greek as well. So I showed her. So it goes for a good conversation, right? I showed her one of your clips speaking about Greeks with Stiglitz. I bet you heard about going through your mind, sitting there, trying to explain what free markets are really about to people who are completely outside of that realm.
Well, I mean, you're right. I was very fortunate that I was like James Bond. I had a license to thrill, and there's a rule: never share a stage with animals, pets, kids, and Hugh Hendry. And I think Nobel Prize winners now understand that rule. I think some of my pent up anger, what people wouldn't recognize, is that 3-4 years prior to that BBC interview, I had the biggest short position against the Icelandic krona. I had about $300 million, which is simply insanely large. And at the same time, I was speculating on the demise of the US housing market, and I had a 2's10 curve steepener. So I was betting that the Fed would go from 5.25 to zero. And of course, the 10-year rates would be sticky and they wouldn't go to zero overnight. So we would get, the spread would blow out to maybe 300 basis points. Of course, it was a torturous. All of my pronostications came to pass, but not in the timeline that I had hoped for. And so I found myself having to kind of carry these enormous risk positions under huge psychological pressure. In the end, I had to choose between one of those two trades, Iceland or the Fed trade. They were really the same trade, but so I had to let Iceland go. And as the record will show, that when it came to October 2008, I still had my position, and I eventually, I made over 30% for the calendar year 2008. But it was kind of just, I was saying, put me in an audience with one of these esteemed, holy, the like bishops or cardinals of the Roman state. Put me up against one of these guys who don't live in the real world, and I'm going to tell them what it's all about. And so that was kind of the backstory to that BBC interview.
But the Greek politicians were not. And so if the free market were to really happen, they would have been able to go to the extent of debt and corruption that they went through. And so in my view, and this kind of triggers them, right? Is when I say you were doing God's work by basically preventing them through the bets on the interest rates and the collapse so that they finally stop. And a lot of people don't understand that perspective. What is your perspective on what's going on now? If you were to bet on something, but knowing what you know, meaning that, the market can be wrong longer than you can be solvent, and the fact that there is such manipulation on free markets.
Yeah. So it ends in a discussion about philosophy, and it's very related to our beginning, because it ends up being a belief system and not really a market-based system. And with COVID and all of these other extraneous factors, it reveals just how willing we are to be led, we want to believe that the world is orderly. Almost no one understands money. Money is just so poorly misunderstood, and we have now lived in, I want to say, a mild but a depression following the great damage inflicted upon collateral values to the euro-dollar banking system, the shadow banking system, which really runs the world. And it's so powerful, it's so dominant, and yet it is not discussed. And instead, we put on top of that, again, this kind of Game of Thrones, which is the Federal Reserve, which talk about interest rates, and they talk about their views on the economy, and they talk about inflation, and they give guidance as to what they may be going to do in 2 years' time. And it is simply nonsense. And we see that the propaganda of financial press, which is there to serve the purpose of these central banks. And they tell us what the central banks may or may not do, what they should do. They tell us that we are on the verge of a lot of inflation. They do not understand that inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Prices
academics, because I always want to know what not to think sometimes. And so I was listening carefully, because this was a person that also advised the Swiss National Bank. And so he was telling me that the central banks could not push for inflation as much as they want to, and so that we are in a deflation, and that most likely there's going to be deflation, and that was the risk rather than inflation. In my view, I think we only have two tails: either depression or hyperinflation, and the question is what would you say would happen first, knowing that we see UBI and we also see what's going on in the markets at the moment?
I think the central banks are largely irrelevant. They are theater. It's like a boring soccer match. It always results in like a home defeat for the home team. It's not a question of the central bank not having the license to, or the daring to demand more inflation. They just don't see. I believe in transparency. I believe in honesty with oneself, and with everyone that you meet. And what I found in the world of finance is that investors are not necessarily seeking transparency or honesty. So I would go to great lengths to make them aware of all of my weaknesses, all of my errors. I thought it would be better to explore avenues where I made mistakes so that they would be better versed in understanding.
Thanks